so much for joining us today. I am delighted to introduce you to our guest. You may have heard her speak at an event. You may have seen her on a webinar or at one of the conventions that she attends. I think you're going to learn a lot today. She is the most well-versed counselor in ADHD that I've met with, so I think you're going to really enjoy her. Her name is Sharon Celine. She is a licensed clinical psychologist with over 30 years of experience of working with ADHD, anxiety, working with the mental health area, working with teens and adults, and just all different types of demographics. And once you get to know her, you'll know exactly what I mean by that. So thank you for joining us today, Sharon. I graciously appreciate you being on here.
It's my great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you about focus and ADHD and all kinds of things.
Perfect. So right before the show, you and I were talking about your cards, and I'm so interested that I'm definitely going to purchase them. But do you mind sharing with us what you were telling me about the cards that you just finished?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to do that. So I'm the author of a book called What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, Working Together to Empower Kids for Success in School and Life. And I was approached to create a card deck. It's called the ADHD Solution Deck, and it's 50 strategies to help kids learn, reduce stress, and improve family connections. And what I love about these cards is that they take the 5 C's and they put them into 5 suits. Plus, they're really pretty. Your listeners can't see them, but they're very nice. And then each card has a quote from a parent or a child, a challenge, and a tool. So for example, let me see what's in the self-control. So here's one, self-control, what to do when worrying takes over. Carter, age 11, says, I'm used to a lot of stress. I worry about being wrong or letting my parents down. I don't have a relaxing place. So the challenge is that kids with ADHD, sorry, I'm hearing a beeping in my ear. I don't know why I'm hearing that beeping. So hold on a second.
Okay.
Okay, all right, so.
Yeah, we don't hear it on this end, so you're good.
So what's the challenge? Kids with ADHD lack adequate coping skills to deal with the frequent anxiety they experience and become easily dysregulated. And the tool, practice breathing techniques with your child before bed to be used later in a crisis. Try alternate nostril breathing. I talk about this later. I think we'll talk about this later.
Yeah.
Or bubble breathing. Take a big breath in through the nose and blow it out slowly through the mouth as if you're blowing a huge bubble. And do at least 3 rounds. Teach your child to notice when they feel anxious and use these calming tools immediately. So each of the cards is like that. It has something that's from someone's real life experience, a challenge, and a tool. And I think people really like people with ADHD and really like these as both parents and their kids too, because it's a different way to get information. You don't have to leaf through a book. You can just say, okay, today I want to do a compassion card and I'm going to pull one and see, what I can do today to set something differently. Or maybe this week I'm going to work on that self-control and see how that goes.
That's honestly, I'm really excited to order mine because I think there's a lot of things I can learn as well. But one of the examples that you gave right before we started this podcast today, and you don't have to pull the card out, but one of them was a parent that was in the kitchen and there were, her and her teenage daughter were coming to blows. And if that were to happen, I was interested in the response. That was so interesting. What should a parent do? What should the teenager do? I found that to be really enlightening because I would say many parents have had that happen, especially now during this time as well.
So the 5 C's of ADHD parenting are self-control, compassion, collaboration, consistency, and celebration. And in a moment when things are escalating, what we want to do is notice that they're escalating and call a pause in the action. And that pause could be maybe everybody taking 5 or 10 minutes away from each other. We agree to 10, maybe in 15 minutes. I'm setting the timer, then we're going to come back. Your kids could go up to their room or maybe shoot some hoops in the backyard, and you can go to the bathroom, wash your face, take a glass of water. It's really important that we calm our nervous system down, because when we're all activated and agitated, we're not listening. We actually can't really express our thoughts very well because emotion is driving us. And we really want to settle. And that's where that alternate nostril breathing comes in. You take your forefinger, you close one nostril, you breathe in with the other, and then you switch. And you do this 3 to 5 times, and your whole system starts to slow down. And then we can get into our clear thinking brain. But without that, we really can't.
That's great. Actually, it reminds me, I have to share with you. I had hurt my arm and I was going through physical therapy, and I had this therapist that had me lay down on my back and put my feet up against the wall, and he gave me a balloon and said, blow into this. And it was one of those tiny ones. And felt
That's
like
right.
I felt like I was being taped at that moment. And I'm like, okay, is this a
Mhm.
joke or what? But he did. And so what happened is I could not do it. And then it was like, once you had to blow the balloon up, then you exhaled all the way out.
That's
And
right.
so that was almost a light bulb moment for me. I remember that.
Mhm.
And speaking of light bulb moments, so again, after we were talking before the show, I had mentioned to Sharon about how we started the company Refocus the Creative Office. And I had shared with her that I was in my car one day. My son, who has ADHD, was with me. And I thought I was going through dementia or early onset dementia, because I was forgetting appointments, forgetting meetings, forgetting things. And as I'm telling her the story, she says, "You were menopausal." And I was like, "Oh my goodness, that's exactly what was going on." But what came of it is an amazing company now with 34 products. But my son said to me at that moment, he said, "Why don't you create a password book for your clients?" Which is what we did. And we have 11 versions now. We have all these products that help you focus. But what happened is it continued to get worse. And I went to my doctor and found out that was absolutely what was going on. And so, if you are a woman that's listening to this, and let's say you are forgetting things, or you're emotional, or just not yourself, I would encourage you to talk to your counselor, talk to your doctor. And Sharon and I were both discussing this, that if you have a doctor and you don't feel like you can talk to her or him about this, find a new one, because there are answers.
Absolutely. And I remember I was at a conference once with Russell Barkley, and he said that for neurotypical women, having going through perimenopause is like having ADHD. So we have to imagine it's double the experience for women with ADHD. There's a whole chemical soup in our brains, and our hormonal changes dramatically affect how we function. And so, perimenopause and the change for women is dramatic in although it happens slowly over time, the ways that the levels of various chemicals or neurotransmitters in our brain are affected is very real, and it is important to try to get some help if you're struggling with that.
Right. And again, I think my husband even noticed it, and he just said, "You're not you, you're not yourself." And that's when, a lot of people don't talk about that, and they should, because it's definitely an area that many women go through. So definitely do that. And it was interesting because we were talking a lot about focus, and the other thing I wanted to ask you about was several things, but distraction. Now, a lot of people get distracted today, right? Even when they're in a meeting, or when they're trying to take a test, or say, and it seems like we wander off. And is there any advice that you have for that? Because it's kind of like we get away and it's hard to bring us back to the middle.
Mm. Kids tell me all the time that they don't notice when they've wandered, they notice when they come back, because it's when they come back that they're lost suddenly, like they've missed something, or the class has moved on to a different thing that a different problem, and they were still, somewhere in the Bahamas, were thinking about the first problem, or really not thinking about the first problem, which is more accurate. And so I think that what we want to do is to notice when we're distracted, and to figure out some strategies for how to bring yourself back. Rather than be mad at yourself for getting distracted, that's how your brain works. What you want are some strategies for when you come back. So what are you going to do in those situations? Sometimes kids might look on someone else's paper to see where they're going, which is why with remote online learning, so many kids are struggling now, because they don't have those social cues or that help that's right in front of them. Another thing that you can do is, if you have trouble remembering, or that you drift, maybe record the meeting that you're in, so you can listen to it later to make sure you haven't missed anything. Some businesses may not like you to do that, so ask if there could be a note taker for you. What are the accommodations, if you're an adult, that helped you through school that you can bring to your work environment?
That is really great advice. And the reason I wanted to touch on this is that I have ADHD. I didn't know it until I was 45. I'm 52 now. But just that scenario that you gave of being in a classroom and missing the problem or something, I can absolutely 100% relate to. But at the time, there weren't the resources that we have today. And so I think my son was probably 16. And someone said, "Well, at least you have accommodations." And I looked at their person and I said, "What?" I did not know what accommodations was. And I think there are a lot of people, I talk a lot about this because I think there's a lot of parents that don't know what accommodations are. And I remember specifically going to my school and saying, "Why didn't somebody mention this to me?" And they said, "Well, we asked if you needed assistance." And to me, that was somebody sitting with my child, and I didn't want to embarrass him. That's not true. Accommodations can be a variety of things. And I want to touch on those. And so help me remember, Sharon, they are a note taker, which I don't know if they do in high schools, but I will say they do that in college. And I do want to highlight that because I just went through that with my son. And what that is, a note taker is not somebody sitting right next to you, but for his college anyway, at the University of Missouri, it is someone that if you tell the disability office, they arrange it. The professor asks if there's an opportunity for a note taker. There's someone in the class that take notes. They upload it on the computer. It's sent to your student, and there's no embarrassment. Now, is that the way it's usually done, Sharon, with other schools?
It's done that. It's done like that in high school also.
Mhm.
You can request that there's a note taker, and then they find a student in the class to take notes. Or if you have a friend in the class and you're not embarrassed to ask them, you can ask them for the assistance.
Right.
I think it's better to go through the guidance department because
Mhm.
then it can be less shameful for kids. Some kids don't care. But you want to have a formal arrangement around that because otherwise you may or may not get the notes.
Right. And it's a process. So, you have to go through,
Absolutely.
but the benefits of that is that if your child, a teen, adult, college student, if it helps them, they can have extra time.
Mhm.
They can go to a different room if they per se. So there's a lot of things. So if you're a parent or a student that is not aware, go to the disability or the guidance office at your school, or your teachers, and the counselors of the school should know about this as well. So I'm really
Absolutely.
glad we talked about that because again,
Yes.
I was talking to someone at CBS last week, and one of the managers, she was saying the same thing, and she said, what are accommodations? My
Right. So,
yeah.
so accommodations, if you're found to meet the criteria for a 504 or an IEP, and many kids with ADHD do meet the criteria for either a 504, which are accommodations, or an IEP, which is an individualized education plan. And there are the IEP. There's a mandate to provide services, and the accommodations for 504 are sort of a step down, but you still get those accommodations, such as preferential seating, or
Mhm.
a separate place to take a test, or maybe even a note taker.
Right. And so, you have so much experience, Sharon, both with both teens and adults. And one of the areas that I hear from our listeners who will write in with questions is a couple of things. They'll have me ask things about impulse control or risky behaviors. How do parents deal with that, especially because a lot of teens, high school students are kind of pinned up at home right now? What do they do if they find that their student or adult child in college is doing any of these risky behaviors?
That's a long question and a
Mhm.
really long answer, which I'll do my best to keep
Sure.
concise, but we could do a whole show on
Yeah,
that.
definitely.
So first of all, we have to separate out high schoolers and college students, because if you have a college student who is not living at home, um, your influence over what they're doing is considerably uh, circumscribed, smaller.
Mhm, mhm.
When you have a teenager living in your house, you're still legally responsible for their well-being, and so you have more influence. You can take them to their pediatrician. The pediatrician can, make recommendations that they will be more likely to follow because they have a long-standing relationship with this pediatrician. Risky behaviors are things that need to be taken very seriously, and particularly now with the isolation that's related to the pandemic, kids are not using their thinking brains as much as we would like, and
Mhm.
particularly kids who have ADHD and already struggle with impulse or emotional control may be doing that even more. And so they're smoking marijuana, or they're smoking cigarettes, or they're drinking because they want an outlet. They want something that's going to make them forget what's going on and feel better and connected to their friends. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of peer pressure. Um, but I think that if you are suspecting that your child is smoking too much, then I would go and start with the pediatrician right away and say, look, I think we have a problem, and I'd like to talk about it as a family. Most pediatricians, what I would do is leave a message for the pediatrician before you go in to see them, or their family practitioner, or whoever's your care provider, and let them know this is why you're coming, because they'll want to have time alone with your teen so that they can talk to your teen, and your teen will be more likely to listen if you're not in the room.
That's an interesting point about going to the pediatrician versus going to a counselor. I'm just curious, is there a preference when you should go to one over the other?
I like to recommend that you go to your primary care provider first, because your child has a long-standing relationship with this person. This is the person where they've gone to when they have a sore throat, or they need their shots, or they have a stomach ache or something. They have a trust in this person, and this is the person who will probably be more likely to speak to honestly as a starting place. Then we can have this person actually refer them to someone else. But we want to start with some unknown quantity. Now, I didn't get to college students, and I do want to say something
Please,
about
yeah,
that.
please.
So one of the challenges, so there are two situations. Your college student lives with you, your college student lives elsewhere. So when your college student lives with you, obviously there are guidelines about how to live in your house. And if you see them, hurting themselves or making poor choices through these risky behaviors, then a conversation is what's warranted. And in that case, you could try to have a session with a primary care provider, or you, which would again be a good place to start. And you could also say, I'm tired of this fighting. We need to figure out a better way to live together. You don't like my nagging. You don't like the conflict either. I'm going to talk to so-and-so. I'm going to try to connect some names so we can find someone to work out how to live as a family now that you're in college, but you're living at home. And so I wouldn't necessarily talk about, we're going to go see someone because you're smoking too much marijuana. You'll never get them to go.
Right.
Like that will be failure. You talk about the relationship and wanting to improve the relationship, and then they'll be happier or more willing, maybe not happy, to go with you. When kids live away from you and go to college, you have very little idea of what they're actually doing in their lives. And you have to trust them for what they are reporting to you. Now, my feeling is that, what you don't know, you don't know. But when your child is starting to fail classes, when your child isn't showing up for classes or commitments they made, and you hear from the school about this, or your child isn't returning your phone calls for a week or 2 weeks at a time, then you want to reach out to the school and say, I'm concerned. What can you do to help me? Obviously, the best person to talk to is your adult student. You want to start there. But if you can't start there, then you might want to ask the school to check in with them.
That's really great advice, especially now, because a lot of students, even with my son, I know this, he lives away, but they're online. So, we don't know if they're doing it. And I've heard through other parents and things like that right now that a lot of them are struggling with the online portion, and I'm not sure why. And I think we'll know down the road, right, with more situations as this pandemic goes through and we find out what worked and what didn't work. But if you know of a student right now that is, maybe let's just say they're not doing as good as they could, and you're the parent, you would, at that point, would you reach out to the school, or would you, I guess,
I would contact the class dean and say, I am concerned. My child is reporting they're not doing well. And I wondered, how could we work together, or what services do you offer? Kids aren't doing well in school right now because many kids don't learn well this way. Right. They don't learn well. Online learning is somewhat disengaging unless it's a small group and a conversation. And that's not always the case. If you're taking a large lecture class, that's not super fun. And, or some kids can do well with asynchronous learning, which means learning that's not at the same time that you're actually paying attention to it. So it's recorded. So you have to do it on your own. And some kids do that okay. And a lot of alternative learners don't like it at all. They can't do it. They can't bring themselves to do it. They have trouble watching the videos. Synchronous learning is different. You show up, your face is on the screen, hopefully, and you're engaged. There are questions, there's chat, etc. So I think it really depends, and that's part of what we're seeing in both college students and high school students, middle school students, elementary school students. Just a lot of anxiety and frustration because this is not how they learn best.
Right. And I want to ask you a couple of questions about that, but I know we jumped right in. So I want to find out from you, because I always think that everyone has a journey and we all take different roads to get to that journey. So I would love to find out how you decided that you wanted to become a counselor, why you wanted to go into ADHD area, anxiety area. What was it that took you? Because I think a lot of students as well who are in college, I own a search firm, and I have people that will call me and say, I went to school to be an attorney. I don't want to do that. Right. And so I think learning by other people's examples of what they do and what they've done is inspiring. So if you wouldn't mind, I would love to know that about you.
Well, thank you. That's a great question. I have a background in theater, and I was also
And I have a background in theater too, so as you know, so I
Right.
was a theater major
So
too.
I was going to say, I was a double major in what's called semiotics and history, which was, semiotics was kind of like communication. So it had theater and filmmaking and stuff. And after college, I had like 7 jobs. And one of my jobs was being an assistant director at the Boston Youth Theater for a production they were doing. That was a different type of production for them. It was, it was an organic production about what it was like to be a teenager in Boston. And all of the sketches and the scenes came from stories kids told about their lives. So there was a lot of really interesting group work about to draw these stories out and flesh them out so they would be, good scenes, and there was, a narrative through the play. And I found that I was just so much more interested in the stories than in actually the production, although I did my job, of course. And then I wanted to pursue counseling, and so I got my master's in psychology at New College of California, and then I got my doctorate at the California School of Professional Psychology. I became interested in ADHD. So I was trained as a family therapist. That was really what I loved. And I worked with kids, but I also really worked within that family unit. And what I found over time was that I was really drawn to these families that were living with ADHD. And over the course of my career, more and more information about ADHD emerged, like what it was and how it worked and how it affected kids. And what happened is around this was going on, my nephew, who was like in kindergarten or first grade, was diagnosed with ADHD. And then my brother realized that he had it. And then all my childhood puzzle pieces fit together. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do, because I would like to help other families live more successfully and with more calm than my family was able to do.
Right. Was your family Italian? My family was Italian.
No, neurotic Jewish people.
Oh, there you go.
But very similar, and I think that, in our Mediterranean gestalt, but I think that what was interesting to me was really seeing how the struggles that I thought were just unique to my family and my family dysfunction were actually not, that they're really common among many, many, many people who are living with ADHD or raising kids with ADHD. And, what it's like to be a sibling who's neurotypical, and then to have, a sibling who struggles. It's just very interesting.
Definitely. Speaking of the family dynamics, another question that we hear a lot of is, what if you have an older person in your family that, let's say, may have they might be depressed, or they might have anxiety, they may be bipolar, who knows, right? But they're too old, they're not going to go see a doctor, and they're not going to, they've made up their mind. And I have people that will ask me, and I'm like, I don't know, I'll ask on the show, but they will say, how do you get that person there?
You mean if you're living with an older person,
or just let's say it's a sister or a brother or an uncle or someone that is that they're older, but they're not your child, so that they could use some help, but they're not going to do it. Yeah, that's a tough one. So I always thought it's interesting to find out your perspective on that.
It is a tough one. And I think in those situations, taking a family approach is very helpful, because you're concerned. They may not be concerned, but your concern is valid, and it is affecting your relationship with that person. So how can you meet with someone, you and that person and anybody else in the family, to talk about the impact of your concerns about them, what you're noticing, and what might help them live a more satisfying life. I mean, one of the things that's so hard about treating depression is the hopelessness of it. It's not just the helplessness, but the hopelessness. And so feeling like, well, nobody can help me, and it doesn't matter anyway. So we have to try to find something that does matter. And probably what matters, one of the things that matters, is your relationship. So that's where a good place to start.
That's great. Yeah, I would absolutely commend that as well, and agree, because as we were talking, whether it's your doctor or a counselor, in today's technology, you can listen to podcasts, you can watch webinars, and you can find different counselors that specialize in many different areas, and find maybe somebody that connects with you. Because when I was younger, we didn't have things like this. So you got the local counselors that were available. Now you have an opportunity to find the best of the best, and who might work with you better. And so, when I was reviewing your background, one of your books that you came out is What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, Working Together to Empower Kids for Success in School and in Life. So I'm curious, so was that inspired to you by having teens that came to you and parents were getting it? Or,
Yes,
I'm curious.
But it wasn't just teens. It was elementary school kids, middle school kids, and teens. They were telling me one story, and their parents were telling me another story, and those stories were not meeting. And so if I felt like there was a lack of an ability to listen, to to be aware, to promote a kind of neutral awareness where you're not judging them, and to ask questions and to hear what kids have to say. Kids have some idea of what makes sense for their brains, whether they're 5 or they're 15. And we want to try to tap into what that is, so that we can use what makes sense to them in whatever kinds of programs or plans or processes we're trying to create. You're not going to basically give a strategy to a kid, and if it doesn't make sense to them, they're not going to do it. So you can't just give strategies and say, here, why aren't you doing this? Because it doesn't make sense. I worked with several families, all of kids, of girls of different ages, and the mothers wanted very much to organize these girls' rooms according to all the shirts get hung up, all the pants go in the pants hanger,
Right.
the dresses go here. And one of my clients, is 10. She's like, I don't want to do my closet that way. That's why my clothes are on the floor. And the mother's, that's ridiculous. I said, wait, can we just listen to what she wants to say? And what she said is, I want my clothes arranged by color, because if I wake up and I'm having a purple day, I want to find my purple clothes.
Oh,
like,
isn't that interesting?
That's so interesting. So I said to the mom, could we try this for 3 weeks or a month, see what happens? After week 1, they came back and said the room was 70% better.
You pick your battles.
That's right. But you also have to work with what makes sense. I call that self-smart organizational systems. What makes sense to those kids?
Right. And listening, as you said, even with my son when he was younger, that really spurred a lot of the creativity in our company because it wasn't working. Something wasn't working. And so I literally would get on my knees and talk to him and just try to figure out ways to help him. And that's why we always say our products are created through the eyes of a child with ADHD, because I had to figure out a way that would work for him. And it's interesting because, and I'll give you a perfect example. In middle school, he was on medication, and we had all 6 different teachers, I believe. And here's myself, here's 6 different teachers, and his dad and his stepdad. And it was so intimidating, actually. And I'll never forget, the teacher pulls out his homework and says, look, this is your son in second hour. And it was beautiful. It was well written. It was perfect. And she goes, and this is your son in 6th hour. And it was like a kindergarten, and it was sloppy. And she goes, and he's just not focused. And I looked at her and I said, oh my goodness, his medication is worn off.
That's right.
And
That's exactly
it was
right.
the same teacher that showed me that she was the 2nd hour and 6th hour. And so that is an example, if anyone's listening to this, that just really try to be on your child's team and help them versus trying to fix them. If I could ever say any advice on that, because that's for us, that's what worked, and that's what is working.
And you're a compassionate parent, and you're trying to meet your child where he is. And that's what compassion is really about. And that nurtures empathy in kids with ADHD who often may not have it because they miss the cues. It's hard for them to meet someone where they are when they can't really meet themselves. And so when we as adults actually practice what I call attentive awareness, we're paying attention, we're aware, we're not judging, we're being open. That helps them feel like they're okay. And then they can do that for themselves more, and then they can do it for other people. It's a skill that they have to learn over time.
Right. And, we're all a work in progress, right? I mean,
Of course.
even the parents,
Right.
It's interesting today, as a matter of fact, my husband had to take some furniture or something up to my son up in college, and he rode up with my ex-husband. And I have always, when I married him, I said, listen, I do everything through my son's eyes, and we have to get along and we have to work together because it impacts school, it impacts his life. And I sat there today, and I'll never forget this. And I told my husband this last night, and I said, it's really great that you're doing this. And he said, you taught me. And I was like, wow, it's, if I've done one thing in my life, it's to take anything that happened in your marriage and you just put it away, because it doesn't matter. It's all about, it's easy to say that, but it's really what matters is really their life now, because you've lived your life and now they're living theirs.
That is a beautiful, beautiful story.